Long Take Review, where four college professors talk film, providing insight, not assigning homework. I'm your host, Jen Bankard, and I'm here with a wartime podcaster, Mr. Greg Cass. How's it going, Greg?
When a celestial mass emerged in the Indian Ocean, we did what we often do. We squabbled over it. Countries rushed in to claim it as their own, setting up research facilities to exploit its resources. What was found inside that island is nothing short of the discovery of the millennium. I'm good, Jen. How are you doing?
I'm doing amazing, and somehow I now appreciate Harrison Ford even more. Bless you, sir, for that exposition.
Bless you for signing on to so much exposition, sir.
Yes. So, listeners, if you're wondering, that was a reference to the film we are here to review today, Captain America: Brave New World. Now, I get that this movie came out ages ago, but it was in the mix of Oscar season, so we had to kind of put it to the side. We were like, well, we can review that later. And now over a month later, we are now here. I've now actually seen the movie. I'm assuming opening weekend, like a good Marvel fan. But I'm so happy that we can play catch up. And yeah, thank you to Greg, the last Marvel defender, for waiting patiently till we had a chance to review this. So, as a refresher, because maybe you haven't seen the movie since it came out, the movie is about Sam Wilson, Captain America, having to take on the mantle from Steve Rogers. He investigates an international incident involving President Thaddeus Ross, played by Harrison Ford. That's the most bare bones description. I feel like if you're going to try to do anything else, it's going to start getting to either spoilers or overly complicated. So we're just going to leave it at that. If you are listening to us for the first time, we will have a spoiler-free section designed for those who have not yet seen this movie. And then with a very clear alert, we will shift into spoiler mode for the rest of the show. So if you're like, I also have not seen this movie yet, I'm waiting for it to come out on Disney+. The beginning of our show will be for you. Greg, if listeners don't want to recast us with Harrison Ford after listening to this episode, what can they do?
Well, just because you just busted me looking at my phone, I was trying to see if it actually might come out on digital this week. It's got to be close, right? So we might have timed this perfectly, listeners. Like, if you just saw this come out and we're putting this out, disregard everything Jen just said, because we just planned it perfectly.
Great, we did it on purpose.
Release. Yes. Well, Jen, if listeners don't want to miss new episodes, because, maybe this movie proves you have to see all episodes for things to make sense. When they drop, please follow The Long Take Review wherever you get your podcasts. We host the feed on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com, but you can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to find podcasts. And as a reminder, you can follow us on Instagram and Threads, at The Long Take Review, and on Letterboxd at LTR Pod. Take that, PT. That's 2 in a row. If I get 3 in a row, you're officially fired.
Yeah, then we got to work out some system where you have joint custody over that part of the episode. I don't know what's going to happen. All right, so we're going to get right into it with our short takes. Greg, what was your general reaction to Captain America: Brave New World, or whatever you remember from it? and also feel free, I would say, because I think this is part of a major franchise, so feel free to throw in any context about, like, what is your relationship with, not necessarily Marvel, because I think we know where you stand on that, but like Captain America movies specifically.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a good place to start, and I will ask you to fill in your personal details as well. So Captain America is a hard one because, to me, they have had the most interesting entries so far, right? When I think at some point we ranked Marvel movies, if you were to ask me to rank it, Winter Soldier, Captain America 2 would be right up at the top of my list. I think that is one of the best outings Marvel has ever done. So that's kind of a lot to live up to, even without the fact that we're talking about a major casting change, and we're talking about, we're talking about 2 major casting changes, essentially, and a movie that has kind of had a very long gestation period because of pandemic and then strike concerns. So my expectations, I tried to keep pretty low, but I attended this with my 9-year-old who could not be a bigger Captain America fan. He has a replica shield hanging up in his bedroom. During the pandemic, back God, when he was like 6. We watched Falcon and Winter Soldier together, and he created cardboard wings and flew around our backyard when he couldn't play with anybody else, flying around like Captain America, as in the current Captain America, right? Not the old Captain America. So I was very excited to go with him. He also really loves the Hulk, and so he was really excited. He shared some of the criticisms that critics have also shared regarding Red Hulk, but generally it made my appreciation of the movie go up. So I had a great time at this. It moved. I think some Marvel movies, when they clock in at like 220, 230, it's a little tough. And I had a good time. I'm not going to pretend this ranks among the absolute top of the Marvel films, but I think maybe we'd all do better off if we don't compare a new Marvel film to Infinity War and Endgame, but instead compare it to, like, I don't know, Thor 2 or something like that, which, which is maybe not maybe somewhere in between those two is the most fair. So I would go with flawed but solid for my overall short take. Jen, what's your short take and history with the cabin?
Oh, yes. So I really like the Captain America storyline. Captain America isn't necessarily my favorite Marvel character. I'm now trying to quickly think about like where he would rank. I do think Chris Evans as Steve Rogers definitely boosted my enthusiasm for Captain America as a character when the MCU was started going. But the main thing for me is like, for the Steve Rogers run of Captain America, it really was the World War II factor that kind of drew me in. I'm a huge fan of Haley Atwell as Peggy and just the kind of old timiness. I know PT, I'm hearing in my head his criticism, which I feel like he made on a recent episode, of that there are no actual action scenes in the Captain America: The First Avenger. There's just montages. Yeah. But I still really liked it, and so yeah, I have a good history. I was there for every single moment of Marvel starting out on Disney Plus, so I watched vigilantly the entirety of Falcon and Winter Soldier. I do really love Anthony Mackie and Sebastian Stan together. That show is far from perfect, especially towards the end, but I think they really captured something magical in terms of their chemistry together, and the kind of like, buddy comedy, like we hate each other but we really love each other kind of thing. And in general, I'm a big fan of Anthony Mackie as Falcon and now Captain America. And I think whatever problems this movie has, which we will, I'm sure, talk about it like throughout the rest of this episode, I feel like he remains innocent. Like, I just feel bad that his big moments have been kind of sullied by subpar writing, especially for him and his character, and the storytelling hasn't matched the energy quite of his performance and his like him inhabiting this character, which I really like. So I would say, like, yeah, like you, I kind of ended the movie, this movie, Brave New World, like semi charmed by it still, but man, that first act for me was really rough. I was just like, this movie is not good. What is happening? What is going on?
Yeah.
And then I think for me, it's just very inconsistent. I think the scene to scene, my enjoyment of the movie really varied. And then kind of by the end, I was like, oh, yay. I still like Sam Wilson as Captain America. And that wasn't so bad. but it's hard. It's hard to ignore the flaws and kind of the seams of the script of this movie, for sure. And the production quality is like very variable depending on what scene you're in. So yeah, it was a rough go at the beginning. I definitely was more positive by the end. But I'm excited to kind of go over and dissect and diagnose what's going on with this movie, because it is very interesting as a movie. And as an MCU artifact, for sure. All right. So, but before we do that, I think before we really dissect it, to whom do we recommend this movie in the recommendation algorithm, where we establish the audience of a film? So is this one really just for folks like us who are like the last Marvel fans still paying attention? Do we have to be a hardcore Marvel fan to be into this movie, do you think?
Well, you're asking that question at an interesting moment, and as listeners to our last episode know, we were very excited to talk about this big kind of tease for Doomsday, and the Doomsday trailer makes it very clear that the current round of Marvel movies are very much in play for the next Avengers movie. And we'll keep it broad in case people don't look at specifics, but I would say that one of the takeaways from that trailer is that Captain America Brave New World and Thunderbolts are going to be like a central part of the storytelling going forward, with a lot of their cast returning to continue on. And I think that combats some of the feelings that other people felt that this might be just kind of finishing off some contracts and getting rid of some people for the next phase. And I think it's clear that that's not true. So where my answer would have been on February 15th, I would have been like, it's really only if you care about these characters and you really, want to see this Captain America and so on, I would go to it. But I think if you are excited to move forward, Feige has proven over and over again, everything counts. And even if you don't think it counts, then it counts. I think there's a surface level you can enjoy this movie if you're not a diehard, if you hadn't seen everything else. I think one of the flaws of that first act is they are assuming that most of the audience skipped Falcon and Winter Soldier. So if you saw Falcon and Winter Soldier, you're like, we've been through all this, and the characters were much more interesting in those episodes than they are here, perhaps. And so I think it's a little tricky of a sell, but I think, there's enough here that if you are a diehard, and I mean the deepest of deep diehards, you'll feel rewarded for some of the silliness you've watched over the years in a good way. So Winter Soldier, I actually don't have to make it hypothetical. I dragged my dad to Winter Soldier, who like doesn't care about comic book movies at all, because it was like just a solid action movie. And he had a good time. He laughed a lot. He enjoyed the action, but did say on the way to the car, like, that's what you spend all your time doing, or something along those lines. So whereas that one, I definitely brought my dad to, I can't see this crossing over to the non-Marvel crowd at this point. What about your opinion? Do you think that's true?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the comparison to to Winter Soldier is, while unfair in a lot of ways, because that's one of the best Marvel movies or MCU movies of all time, I would say. I do think that movie works so well because it's a self-contained, it can operate as a self-contained political thriller. Just happens to have Captain America in it. I'm not the first person to say that by any means. But this one definitely feels almost like a really long episode for the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, or like like an addendum to Falcon and Winter Soldier, in a way that, like you said, is not really rewarding people who are just popping in for this one story. It really is, I think, more for the folks that are like tracking everything and that will gasp at the references to things that might portend future appearances by different characters. You know what I mean? Like if you're part of the MCU machine and you've done all your homework, I think this movie is definitely more for you.
Yeah.
You can watch it not being like that. You can watch it kind of cold, but I think there's just a lot less here for you. You're either going to be a little bit confused, or just like overwhelmed by the amount of exposition this movie is trying to give you in order to catch you up. Which I think we gotta really just make up our minds about that. We either have to not care about that.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Or, you know what I mean? Like, just don't do it, and people will just like hand wave it and be like, sure, whatever. Okay, I'm here. Right? I would much rather the dispensing of exposition in favor of a more self-contained individual story. And I think that's what early MCU movies did so well, is that like, the first Thor movie is just a movie if you don't watch all the other things, right?
Yeah.
But it kind of doubles a little bit more as part of the bigger storytelling. Anyway, we're getting off topic probably. But yeah, that's what I would say. I would say that like it feels weird being like you should watch Falcon and the Winter Soldier before you watch this. Maybe the bigger prerequisite is watching is it 2008 Incredible Hulk?
Yeah, and I think a lot of critics have gotten hung up on this, but it's kind of insane. But also, like, the fact that people are saying, like, it's essential. I don't know that it's essential, but you are going to be, like, shocked how much it's a sequel to the 2008
Yeah.
Incredible Hulk, in which Edward Norton stars opposite the former General Thaddeus Ross, who's the actor William
William
Hurt.
Hurt. Yes.
Yeah, and neither of those actors are in the sequel, it would seem, which is kind of crazy. And there's not a green Hulk here at all. There's just the red one.
Yes. I mean, this all also really relies heavily on emotionally on the value of Thaddeus Ross's daughter. It's not Betsy. No, it can't possibly be Betsy Ross. No, it's
No.
what is her name? Oh no.
Betty.
Betty,
You were
thank
close.
you.
You were one letter off.
I was like, they wouldn't do that. That's even extreme for Marvel. Yeah, so I feel like the movie references their relationship a lot and uses it as almost an emotional crutch in a way that if you don't remember who she was, you might be like, what's going on?
And in a way that would have been greatly aided if any of the other Thaddeus Ross appearances had suggested they would someday shell out the money to get Liv Tyler back.
Right, sure.
All right, we're getting too close.
Yeah,
we got to get out of here.
We got to get out of here. We got to get into spoiler mode. So if you have not seen Captain America: Brave New World and you do not want it spoiled, I do not blame you for not having seen it so far. So if you don't want it spoiled, we respect that. You can go watch the movie. Maybe it's leaving theaters. I saw it last week, and I was the only person in my entire screening. And Greg pointed out that's not because of the movie necessarily; it's because I'm watching it so late. But it did kind of feel like this was the end, like this was the end of the run in theaters. So yeah, I would say that, like, unless you want to watch it at home, go out to the theater at the last minute, and then come back and rejoin us for the rest of the conversation. All right, Greg. So I want to stay positive as long as possible. I think you and I are both pretty good at, like, we acknowledge what we love, but we that doesn't preclude, that doesn't mean we deny flaws. Like, so we are going to embrace all of this, and we will talk about what we think doesn't work about the movie. But I want to start with what worked for you. Like, I've been absorbing, since I saw the movie, I've been absorbing and catching up on a lot of extreme criticism of this movie. That is the worst Marvel movie ever. I don't want to get into what is the worst Marvel movie ever, but that doesn't feel right to me necessarily. But yeah, what do you think? Tell us what are the good parts of this movie?
It's not even the worst movie we'll discuss tonight, let alone the worst Marvel movie ever. So I like this approach because I do think, there are some really good things here. So the number one on my list would be Anthony Mackie. I think he continues to deliver with a nice bit of swagger and a nice bit of charm. You've already talked through this, so I'll kind of just only hit it lightly. And we'll note that I think one of the flaws we'll be talking about is that he gets a little lost for a good chunk of this movie. And when it comes solidly on his shoulders, you're like, oh, there's a really good actor here. And he's very capable of having fun and dealing with some really serious things. Second on my list, because I've played this card before, I'm a giant Alias fan. So the fact that Carl Lumbly is back as the old Captain America, the Korean War Captain America, is awesome. And he doesn't get enough, but what he delivers is really well done, and I really enjoyed. And even though so for listeners that don't know, he was in Falcon and Winter Soldier. He plays a man who received the super serum and fought the Korean War in between Steve Rogers' stints as Captain America, but then was hidden away because he was a black man and, mistreated by the government, including put in prison for a long time. So that's like an awesome story, and it's a good comics run, and it's like a really fresh, interesting idea. And I'm really glad they decided to bring that back, even if it doesn't get its full justice. I thought that was really good. And then third on my list is just that Harrison Ford is here. Like, I'm sorry, I gotta be who I am. Like the fact that he's here, a lot of the criticism I heard was like, why is he here? Why did he want this money? And I think he got paid very well. So sure, he can buy a couple airplanes. He's also doing Scotch ads now, so I don't think he's hard to get out of bed, right? Like, yeah. So, but he's really fun, and it's always good to see him kind of doing his thing. It was not until much later that I realized he's basically always in darkened rooms by himself. So he probably like did this on a weekend. But it was really fun to see him and fun to have him, and I'm not gonna deny that. What's on your positive list, Jen? Even though I kept dipping into negative, what's on your positive?
Right. Yeah, it's a challenge in some cases. So, yeah, I would say to work backwards, kind of following up on what on your list. I would say for the first half of this movie did wonder why are we paying Harrison Ford to be in this movie? He seems somewhat underutilized,
Yeah,
right? Because it was kind of like I was scratching my head, to be honest.
sure.
And then there's this one scene where it's Anthony Mackie or Sam Wilson confronting Thaddeus Ross on the carrier, like they're in that like situation room. And then, but the two of them, the sparks really started flying, I think, in my opinion. And I was just like, oh, this is why you hired Harrison Ford, right? Like, but again, it was like, as I said in my short take, like it was pretty inconsistent. Like there were some scenes where, and your opening bit revealed this, either he's giving so much exposition, or I think the writing couldn't really handle the duality of he's like an Air Force One style president, like get off my plane, right? Like I think a better screenplay could have handled that with these sort of like anxiety and implosion bubbling underneath, you know what I mean? But I feel like so much of the first half of this movie just focuses on, oh, and here he is like hunching over, looking stressed out. Oh, here he is like frantically trying to react to the situation, right? And it just never gave us like gravitas Harrison Ford in a way that I think was satisfying and in a way that would fit the genre. Because in a lot of ways, this movie is chasing the genre exercise of Winter Soldier, right? It does have the kind of elements of, they're going on missions like Secret Service agents. They are, or like secret agents. They're, trying to uncover what like a conspiracy of like what something looks like and who can we trust and the paranoia and all that kind of stuff. But it's just a goofier version of it because it's just a bunch of people looking at flashing cell phones and then like trying to kill people, you know what I mean? As opposed to being like a more nuanced, like, oh, like this other Hydra's infiltrated shield and what does that mean, and like the people who are in charge are actually the bad guys now, and like how do we operate under the radar and try to fix this, right? There's just not the thriller element, I think, is just not as strong in this movie, so we never kind of get the version of Thaddeus Ross that I think would be really good in that movie as played by Harrison Ford.
Yeah, there are times when it's aspiring to like specifically like a Manchurian Candidate type of political thriller, and you could imagine that movie being much more effective than what we end up getting here. And it's, I wonder about old versions of the screenplay and how much some elements played in or others did not. I'm not going to interrupt your point. Continue on. That's a good point.
Sure. So, and then the other thing the other good scene that kind of pairs with your list is when he's talking to the new Falcon in the hospital bed, and it's kind of his moment where he kind of both exposes himself and his vulnerability about what he's had to prove and how up until this, like, he's always felt like because he's kind of taking over for Steve Rogers, he has to be so perfect and so excellent just so people don't like write him off. And and it's also a representation thing too. He sort of makes a comment about like, everybody else like me gets a seat at the table, right?
Yeah.
He's like, I can't mess this up. It's a lot of pressure, right? And I thought that monologue was beautifully delivered. And it was a moment like you're describing where I was like, oh, Anthony Mackie. Like, He's really good. I don't care what other
Yeah.
people are saying.
Well, and to your point, I think that Captain America movie is a better Captain America movie, and I'm not here to sleuth it out, but I will say, it's a political climate where it would have been hard to get that out. And all the decisions being made before the last election, even like this idea of if you're too politically motivated, then you go woke, go broke, would have had this big uproar if there'd been a kind of overt plot about having a black Captain America. But that is such a more interesting movie and getting him to grapple with that. And you're right, that's the one scene where it comes to the surface, and it's played out in the symbol of like he doesn't have any serum, right? Like
Mhm.
he's just a guy, and he's awesome. Sam Wilson as a character is an awesome guy, but he doesn't have a serum in his veins, and probably the single greatest scene in the movie, which I'm sure you agree with, is when Bucky shows up. And it's like you knew it was going to happen, and yet you realize how much better this movie is when the two of them are bouncing off each other.
I actually didn't
I
think it was going to happen
Oh,
because
you
I was like,
didn't? Oh,
yeah,
good.
it didn't. It's not like it didn't occur to me that it was possible. I just sort of assumed Sebastian Stan has been so busy with other
Yeah.
movies and Thunderbolts that I was like, oh, they wouldn't bring him in. Like I thought maybe like there'd be a passing reference to him, but I didn't think he'd actually show up in the movie. And so it's
Oh, nice.
amazing how quickly the mood changes when he walks in that room because the
Yep.
two of them fall back into what I was talking about earlier of like their rapport. And suddenly, like, it doesn't matter what the screenplay is doing. They are just like they're just like hassling each other and kind of going back and forth, and it really feels like a different movie in a lot of ways
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
like 5 minutes. So
Well, and I think you're exactly right to say if people agree with us that that was the best scene, and you haven't watched Falcon and Winter Soldier, like that's what's there. That's what's at the
yes,
heart of that show. And I do think those later episodes that are a little rougher are because they get separated and they're not playing off each other as much. You know, and like Sebastian Stan just demonstrates how easy it is to be really good with even mediocre material. My question for you related to that, it probably could stay till later, but Congressman
yeah.
Bucky
What
Barnes?
that's like the first
I
time
mean, talk
I was
about
like,
Manchurian candidate. This is
yeah,
literally
yeah.
somebody who has been brainwashed. I don't know if he's electable.
Yeah, I had questions about that too. I'm like, wait a minute. Like, have they just erased his entire Winter Soldier history and like
Mm.
no one remembers that? Like, have we done the Men in Black flashy to all of the United States? Like, I don't know how that
Because
works.
who would
Anyway,
elect a suspected Russian agent? None of us. None of us. Oh wait. Yeah. And to your point, I don't understand how like it seems like that has to fit into Thunderbolts, but everything we've seen from Thunderbolts
doesn't
doesn't
look like that.
suggest. But like,
Right. He's not with Valerie in a suit being like, "Hey guys, we got to make this team." He's as ragtag as all the other
yeah.
ones and still kind of in Winter Soldier suit mode, right? Like so
So
I don't know.
like my only thought is I think he's, as they're saying, he's giving campaign speeches maybe to run for office, and maybe he fails and just like
Oh,
wallows
right.
back into Winter Soldier mode with Val. I don't know. Very confusing as a like throw
Yeah.
forward.
So you're saying in Thunderbolts there's a conversation where Florence Pugh is like, "Well, why like what are you so special? You tried to run for Congress and you failed. Nobody wanted to vote for you." Like, bleh. I can picture that.
Yeah, but
But
I
that's
don't.
just it's from a audience knowledge perspective, it's super weird because I watch everything just like
Yeah,
you. I'm dedicated to this. I'm reviewing it anytime there's anything new. And I still felt like, wait a minute, did I miss something? Like,
yeah,
is there something
yeah.
I didn't watch? Is there like a short on Disney Plus that I didn't see? Like, so it was really out of the blue. But I think in some ways I would like more of that, the more of the trust in the audience to just pick up on the context clues to catch up on the
Sure.
story more than the kind of heavy exposition, right? Okay, I'm going to add something to the list that you didn't
Yeah.
mention, and that is keeping Sam Wilson at his core a counselor for veterans.
Yes. Good
That
one.
was my
Good one.
favorite part of this movie, probably because that is what his superpower is, and I think that's what makes him different. Because I think the biggest challenge is it's not just that he's stepping into Steve Rogers' shoes in the story, right? Anthony Mackie is trying to replace Chris Evans, who had a fantastic run as Captain America, and so I think that it's only helping him if we lean into what makes him different than Steve Rogers, right? And I went back, maybe this was not a good idea, but I did go back after I watched this movie and watched Winter Soldier again. The introduction of Sam Wilson is amazing. It is so good how they're doing the laps, and he's like, you quoted this when you were in DC and you took a picture
I
of
was,
yourself
I was
on
gonna say, I
the
one-upped you. I didn't rewatch it. I lived
yeah,
it. I
you
went
lived
and
it.
ran around. Yeah. But yes, it's so brilliant and good and funny. And then that paired with the first counseling scene is really great.
Yeah. And the idea that they're still maintaining that at the end of the day, and a lot of people made fun of this, but I actually really appreciated that the end of this movie came down to, well, there's no way from a pure muscle standpoint and pure brute force, there's no way that he can go toe to toe with a Red Hulk, but he can talk him down because that's who he is and that's what he does.
Yeah.
And that he's good at kind of connecting. And when I went back and watched Winter Soldier, one of those early lines, it's like Steve Rogers is trying to walk away from him, and he says something like, I know what it's like. And he gives a very specific detail about, like, you can't sleep, or, like, you know what I mean? Like, to the point where Steve Rogers has to pay attention and be like, wait, I am experiencing that. And he does the same thing with Thaddeus Ross in this movie, right? Where because he remembers that he's a general and not just, I mean, right, currently he's the president in the movie, but
Right.
he doesn't forget that he was in the military, right? And so, like, I just really like that they maintained that.
That's such a nice reading of it, and something really great. And so the one other, so to me, I actually didn't love the fight with Red Hulk at the end. I don't think you're endorsing it right now, but the best action scene for me is the one in the air around the emerging celestial in the Indian Ocean, and it becomes like you're saying about his counseling. It's not about blowing up the other guy. It actually becomes a de-escalation. Let's make sure we prevent a war rather than let's win a war. And for better or worse, Steve Rogers most of the time is like, let's win the war, because that's the circumstances we see him in. So I think you're right that's similarly a difference between the two, and it kind of all comes down to, in the emotional stakes of that scene are his brotherhood with Falcon and trying to save Falcon. So maybe one of the times I had to go back to this to get my son a poster, I maybe just watched that scene and then left because I didn't need to see Red Hulk again for the third time. But it's a really fun fight. And, the promise of making Sam Wilson Captain America is some cool aerial fights. And, Falcon and Winter Soldier kind of started with those and left them out towards the end, which I think was also part of it. So cool stuff.
All right. So next I wanted to kind of talk about, now I'm looking at my list of things. I'm like, can we skip any of these? This movie, well, actually, no, let's try to stay on the positive train. Sure. And go into, like, interpretation mode potentially. So the cherry blossoms, like I mentioned earlier, that knowing how Liv Tyler is somehow related to the MCU is apparently a big important part of understanding this movie. The cherry blossoms obviously are a really important reference throughout for Thaddeus Ross's character, because he keeps talking about, like, I used to take her. That's his one positive memory of with his daughter, who's estranged from him now, right? And then we end the big fight literally in a bunch of cherry blossom trees, right? And granted, like, I think Big Pick was really complaining about how fake that looked, but, like, as a concept, I understood it. I was like, this makes sense. Right? And so, like, what do you make of that? Was that just their way to try to create, like, a backstory or a motivation for his character and make a character arc for Thaddeus Ross in this movie? Does it have a larger significance? I put in here, is it a metaphor somehow? Like, what do we think?
Yeah, well, so for listeners who don't know me from social media, I will say I was in DC for the Cherry Blossom Festival this past weekend, mostly by accident, but I was astonished how crowded it is. So, as I said to Jen on text message, the real lie of this movie, the most fictional aspect, is that they could just stand alone with the cherry trees. Because I'm telling you, wall to wall, thousands of people, every inch was full. Um, but to take your question seriously, it's a hard one because it feels like, and we'll get into this, it feels like a late entry into this story in some ways, right? That at the core, they really just needed a symbol for the relationship between Betty and Thaddeus. And, I do think if you watch that 2008 Hulk movie, you can tell there's a strong protective aspect. It's a little more complicated than this, but Thaddeus Ross is just kind of like not liking his daughter's new boyfriend in some ways, right? And like kind of
Who is
disapproves
Bruce
of him because
Banner?
who's
For
Bruce
those who
Banner?
don't.
Good clarification. And so it's like he wants to protect her and keep her safe. And so I do think it matters that he reminds him that they used to walk there when she was little. And so if there's a kind of bigger it just seems like it becomes a metaphor for innocence. And one would imagine, based on the age of Liv Tyler, that would have been much earlier in Thaddeus Ross's career before he gets this reputation as the Hulk hunter, before he, rises through the ranks. You would imagine that this is a more innocent time for him and not just for her, and that the cherry blossoms are, a part of that. I also don't think, I mean, there's obviously a level where they just thought it'd be really cool to have them in the background and it would be beautiful and as a part of that. But there's something to the fact that the cherry blossoms are beautiful and are known to be like this kind of, again, complicated feelings about the city of Washington, D.C. right now. But I was saying, like, this is amazing, right? Like, this is beautiful. And the way it brought the city together, I think it matters that that's kind of, and again, they are the now I'm really stretching, Jen. They are a symbol of the relationship between Japan and the United States, right? So they were a gift
Oh,
to the US from Japan prior to World War II, right? And then during World War II, they actually there's an anecdote your tour guides will tell you that FDR was standing on the back balcony of the White House and realized he wanted to be able to look out and see Jefferson, the statue of Jefferson standing in the Jefferson Memorial. So he just had somebody tear out a bunch of the trees because it was the cherry trees that were blocking it. And because we were at war with Japan, it was okay, and nobody got that upset as a part of it. But because the movie is a little bit about diplomacy and particularly the relationship between the US and Japan, a struggling relationship in the real world, but also in fake MCU world, obviously, because as you remember, one of the Eternals dropped the atomic bomb. No. Let's not remember that they justified or
we didn't mention
dramatized.
Eternals
Yeah,
in recommendation algorithm. Oops.
you gotta have seen Eternals to understand a bunch of this. So I do think the idea of diplomacy versus war in all the ways you just talk about resonates with the cherry blossoms, but we are doing more work than the film does. So
Right.
any other stretches you want to add to that list of what
I
the
really
cherry
like that.
blossoms?
Actually, really like that reading. But I think I would add to that is, again, if you're overreading and overthinking the screenplay, I think more than the screenplay is thinking about the screenplay. Thaddeus Ross has a disingenuous diplomacy, right? Because he is so fixated on making this treaty go through, but that is so America can have its fingers in the adamantium. I can't believe this is the first time we're saying that adamantium pie, right? Like
Yeah.
it's a we need to get this treaty so we can be the ones in charge of the distribution of this, and kind of like with almost like a false pretense of like, well, everyone's going to get some, but really we're going to be in charge of everything. And the Japanese politician on the other end of kind of his argument about it kind of sees right through it, right? And it's like you were just trying to get this for yourself, and that's not diplomacy, right? And so I like that that's kind of mirrored with the use of the images of the cherry blossoms. I think it's also just like a stark contrast between the undeniable beauty of these trees versus like the sort of grotesque outer manifestation of Ross's inner wrongdoings and moral misgivings, which he is ashamed of. And it's like, I think this movie at the end of the day really is about, and maybe it's time to invoke
thesis, please.
because we're kind of circling, I think. But at the end of the day, I think this movie, above all else, is about Ross's legacy and kind of him realizing that he's been approaching his legacy all wrong. And it's like a reckoning kind of, right? Like he's kind of reckoning with his past and his motivations to be both self-interested, right? Because that's the big reveal, is that he's been taking this drug because he was afraid of dying, and he's kind of exploited poor Tim Blake Nelson.
Had him locked up state in a bunker. Yeah, ready.
Right. And it's all for self-gain, right? He's selfishly exploiting him and keeping him around, using him in a way that's turns out to be very dangerous, and it can't actually control. And all this stuff is like, but then when he thinks about what his daughter thinks of him, suddenly he wants to be better and change, right? And so I think the movie really is about him trying to find that piece again of like, well, how do I both deal with the bad things I've done before and actually go into, to evoke the title of the movie, go into this brave new world where he is better, right? And again, that's probably overthinking it, but that's, to me, maybe if I turned that into a complaint, it's like the movie is really about that and not actually about Captain America at all.
Well, and I think I like that reading because there's a little bit of a Thanos thing going on where when you watch Infinity War, you're like, wait, this is Thanos's movie. The Avengers are all in it, but this is about Thanos, and it kind of starts and ends with him and his actions. And this does a solid 5 minutes before Captain America appears, and it's about Ross and his campaign and filling you in. It begins with him giving his victory night speech. And I think one of the criticisms about this is that it's not political enough, and I think that starts in that opening where you're like, wait, is he supposed to be kind of like Trump? Is he coded like Biden? Is he more of like a Clinton? And I think our natural desire is to find our team and decide which team this guy's on and do that. So the fact that the movie doesn't do that, I think, can be really frustrating. However, I think it's actually much more powerful to do something like what you're saying, which is, I think this is a flaw in a lot of these great men that have been president, is that it all in the end comes down to ego and making themselves better in most cases. And that constant kind of inner monster is driving you to do that. So you have a great legacy, so that you get put on the money and that you have a great monument to you someday. And, I think, again, while it maybe doesn't try to speak to our current moment, we are seeing what happens when money and power are no longer enough and you just want more, more, more. And it's hard to imagine that some of the figures in our country, working in that regard these days, aren't thinking to themselves, wow, I don't have anything else in my life, right? I mean, I'm thinking in this particular moment of Elon Musk wielding a cudgel of government while his daughter goes into Teen Vogue and writes an article about how awful he is, right? Like, I see a lot of parallels to Thaddeus Ross there. And, maybe it's all kind of silly, but I do think this movie is more engaged in its moment, its cultural moment, than some critics give it credit for.
Yeah, and I think I think it's not actually interested in any contemporary political allegory, like you're saying, right? Like, I think it's trying to be, and it might be just the unfortunate thing of like, the creator just came out at the time when everyone was really anxious about AI and was looking to this movie for like, tell us something, to give us some wisdom about what we should do in the future. And it was like, no, like, we just like robots. Robots are cool. And we like Blade Runner. Right. So I do think there's a little bit of that going on here, where it's sort of thinking about, America and Captain America and American politics in this like broader sense, and inadvertently is making people upset that it's not giving us something that we can use in 2025, right? But I do like that comparison that you drew. I think that makes a lot of sense. But then there's probably lots of different figures that you could map that basic kind of dynamic onto.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, it's a little bit Citizen Kane, right? I mean, the what are the cherry blossoms but rosebud? It's a
Right.
sled. We're in spoiler mode. We can say that. Right,
Spoilers for
but the
Citizen
idea
Kane.
is that loss of self, that loss of
Right.
innocence that you might want back, and sometimes that's read into children or yourself being a child. But I think it's that, and
And I think
it's
it's
an
very
American
telling.
project.
I think it's very telling that the first time he almost hulks out, and I feel bad that I can't remember her name. She's great. She's doing good work.
Ruth,
No, it's
no,
his Secret Service agent. The
right, Ruth.
head of-
Isn't that her? That's the
isn't
character
that
name.
yeah? But isn't that wait? But then who's the other woman's name?
Oh, the Secret Service. No, I was confused which Secret Service woman you were talking about.
Yeah, no, she's
Uh,
no. Ruth is the head of security.
right. Ruth
The
is the
other
Black Widow. Yes.
yes, who's been recruited to be his head of security and is doing the investigation alongside
Yes.
Sam. But who I'm
You,
talking
of
about,
course, are
you're
talking
frantically-
about Zosha Roquemore,
Okay,
who
great.
plays. Oh my gosh, it's so silly. On Google, it says Secret Service Agent Number 1 is her
Wait.
name.
Are you serious?
A little more digging around might prove that she has a name, but I think she just might be called Secret Service Agent.
To me, she really felt like Nick Fury's right-hand woman.
Maria Hill.
Yes, thank you.
IMDb says her character's name is Lila Taylor, but
Okay.
I don't remember that in the movie, so I don't blame you
think
for
they say that
forgetting
in the
it.
movie.
I don't
Sure,
think
sure.
it's said.
But anyway, I really liked her. And I
Yeah.
think it's very telling that the first time he almost hulks out, it's her presence that kind of calms him. And he's probably about the age that I think she's the surrogate for his daughter
yeah.
in that moment, kind of. So I don't know. Did you know that there was a whole other superhero that was supposed to be in this that got cut out? Called
I just saw it when I was Googling. Sabra was cut out, right? I believe.
Okay, that's different than what I found.
Or there are multiple.
So do you remember when the McDonald's toys came out?
Yes.
Erroneously, because the movie got pushed back a lot. So there was one of the toys is called Diamondback.
Oh.
Wow. I think. And now I'm kind of like, well, there was one called Diamondback, and then Ruth was like dressed more as a superhero.
Well, and that's what I was when we start to make complaints about. My kids got Ruth, and that's why I remembered her name was Ruth. There's a lot of very just conversation around Marvel kind of misusing its female characters. And this to me was emblematic of that, because my kids get this Happy Meal and they're like, my son's like, it's Captain America. And it opens it up and it's like, Dad, it says it's Ruth. And he's like, who's Ruth? And I'm like, I don't know. And just no idea who it is. She doesn't have a cool superhero name. It just says her name's Ruth. She's a lady. And I'm like, I got nothing. And seeing the movie and getting the fact that she's a widow and there's a little more kind of backstory there. But I mean,
Ruth is supposed to be Sabra.
Okay.
So there was a version of this movie where she kind of like became a superhero. Yeah. Okay. And like maybe that was part of the reshoots, I think, is that maybe some of those last scenes where she's appearing in a Sabra costume or something.
Okay. Oh, how weird to be that actress and not get to see that
and just
version.
Just be Ruth.
Yeah.
But sorry, so the other character is actually the villain, who I think Giancarlo Esposito replaced, because he was a late addition.
Oh. They're snakes, Diamondback, Sidewinder, right? So they're part of the Serpent organization,
the Serpent Society, which I have to admit I'm not really super familiar with.
And I will say, we haven't talked about him. So Giancarlo Esposito is fine here. He's just paid to do his old thing, and he does it fine. But it does feel like that plot kind of goes nowhere, I think, because it was such a late addition. And the promise of more of him later was maybe the best part of his plot line to me, when he makes his threat that he'll break out of the prison and come after Captain America. That I'm like, cool. I can't wait to see that movie or Disney Plus show.
Yeah, I don't know. His scenes really felt tacked on to me. And before I even learned that he was added at the end.
Yeah.
Of this whole
Well,
process.
and so here's one of the things as we start to look towards the future. I will say, I think Marvel is learning a lesson from this, that they need to keep their productions much quieter. And while we just got a big splashy teaser with a whole bunch of chairs telling us which actors are in the upcoming Avengers movie, I think we're going to hear very little about it, because I think it only hurts the reputation of these movies when you hear how long they're in production and how long the reshoots were and how many things there were. And so I suspect they're taking from this that they need to keep things much quieter. As we look forward, we know that the movie's coming out this year, and we know those two. At the moment, we don't know really anything else, I don't believe, unless I'm forgetting. Well, we know Ironheart TV show is still coming, and more animated Spider-Man, and we know Spider-Man 4 is in the works, but that's more because Sony wants to keep shareholders happy, right?
Yeah.
So also they're here in Boston filming soon. So we
Exciting.
know that's happening. So I think Marvel's going to learn the lesson, and I think Star Wars needs to learn this lesson too. Like, let's not announce things till they're really sure, because the perceptions matter a lot in the case of a film like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Ironheart is supposed to be June 24th, 2025. That can't be right. That seems really soon. After Thunderbolts. It's supposed to be the thing that follows Thunderbolts.
Actually, I just saw that they're launching a new Ironheart comic title this week, a new #1. So I suspect that timing works out right? They'll get a trade paperback out in time for you to rush there and buy it after you see the show.
Nice.
So,
I mean, since you're already alluding to the potential future after this movie, do we want to pop into rhetorical situation, kind of look at the broader context?
Yes.
Okay, let's do it. So all 4 of our regular co-hosts are writing professors. We like to have this section of the episode, which we don't normally end with, but I think we're not getting to Oscars watch. Spoilers for everybody.
Not even visual effects. Not even this time. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, we want to have a designated section for making connections to our experience as scholars and teachers. And I think pertinent to what we're going to talk about in the teaching of writing, the rhetorical situation specifically refers to any contextual factors that influence composing and interpretation. And I think anytime you talk about a Marvel movie, the MCU of it all, I think, is a context that's looming large over this individual movie. And so I think, what do you feel like this means in terms of the future? Is this a good sign, a bad sign, a blip, a fluke? Like, how are we interpreting this movie as a piece in the larger MCU puzzle?
And I think you're right. And I just want to acknowledge so many podcasts have had their like hype drafts and so on. Maybe we should have one of those sometime.
We've been trying.
So I will say that a lot of shows have identified this as a very critical year for the like cinematic universe projects, particularly Marvel and DC. I think it is the correct version of the Marvel narrative is to set Deadpool and Wolverine aside, because it's kind of its own different thing, and it's not going to really portend that much into what we've experienced in the MCU or what we will.
Hugh Jackman noticeably
not on it. We got some adamantium, so we might get a new Wolverine, but we are not seeing Hugh Jackman coming back, and not seeing Ryan Reynolds. Not like that really surprises me, but you know, if your movie just made $2 billion, it seems like a good reason to write him in. Maybe it'll be a surprise. So I think, to me, it feels like this is right on pace with where we've been prior to this in the MCU, which is we continue the wobble that I think kind of started for me with Wakanda Forever on through a lot of the releases after that. I don't actually include Black Widow or Shang-Chi because I think those were solid and kind of came before people were really worried. But, you know, as time has gone on, as Doctor Strange 2 happens, as, you know, I'm not even positive I have the right order on all these things. it does get to feel the Marvels. It does get to feel lonely in MCU fandom because I think a lot of people are struggling with it. And I don't think this movie is good enough to assuage anybody's fears that we're not in the wobble. But I also don't think it's bad enough that anybody will walk away from it. I think, it's kind of right where I expected it to be, kind of in a part of that. So I would say, because I see that they're going to weave these characters in, I think it's important. I love Sam Wilson as Captain America, and I think it would be a huge, terrible cave to the worst parts of society if they backtracked and somehow brought Chris Evans back, like there's always rumors about. So I think, the big moment for the MCU is coming in July, and that's Fantastic Four. And if Fantastic Four doesn't work, I think everything is kind of questionable. But I do think a huge part of that Avengers trailer was trying to get people to see this one and to see Thunderbolts, because they know people are thinking of skipping still.
Yes.
Am I misreading it? How do you feel?
No, I think that's about right. I think my only worry for Sam Wilson as a character specifically is that the response to the mixed to negative reviews of both Falcon and the Winter Soldier and this movie is to kind of downplay his character and kind of try to phase him out. And I think it would be really egregious if they just said, like, oh, never mind, back to Chris Evans. That's really problematic for a number of reasons. I don't think they'll do that, but I do think there could be like just a fading of his character, or like we kill him off during Secret Wars and then he never comes back, or something like that. And I think that would be a shame, because I think if you think about how long Anthony Mackie has played this character and the potential for the arc that the character's gone on, I think he's still due his moment. You know what I mean? I think this movie should have been his moment and just isn't. And part of that, I would say, is because it's, like you said, kind of not confident enough to not retread what Falcon and the Winter Soldier, the Disney Plus series, does. And I felt that when watching this, I was kind of like, how in The West Wing we just say, let Bartlett be Bartlett? I just wanted to be like, let Sam Wilson be Sam Wilson, right? Like, let's stop making the story about him taking over. We already did that, right? In theory, that was what Falcon and the Winter Soldier was supposed to kind of take care of. I really wish they had made him just be Captain America and that's it. And not make it about the kind of like, oh, I'm no Steve Rogers. Oh, like people haven't accepted me, right? Like, let's just not do that anymore. And so that's my hope for the future in terms of responding to this movie. I hope that they give him kind of another chance to shine and just be himself, as opposed to making his story anchored in the fact that he's second in line after Steve Rogers.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And as somebody who watched Falcon and Winter Soldier, that was my biggest frustration. It's like, we've done this already. We get there. So just to your point, we should note a couple MCU plot points is Thaddeus Ross in the opening part of the movie asks Sam Wilson to start the Avengers again, right? And this is kind of huge because he is the man who caused the Sokovia Accords and got them all registered and caused all the events of Civil War. So it's kind of a big idea to say, let's restart the Avengers. And, because there are two movies coming out called Avengers, it would seem like somebody restarts the Avengers. But it's also confusing because the Thunderbolts are coming, and the Thunderbolts are, named after Thaddeus Ross. And we don't, it seems to me the best guess I would have is that he developed the plan and now Val is doing it and putting it into action, because he's in prison at the end of this. And I don't think I don't think Harrison Ford is secretly in Thunderbolts, or maybe one scene, one Hannibal Lecter scene, if that, right?
It's just the back of somebody else's head that sort of looks like.
So I do think that, I don't understand how these pieces kind of fit together, but it does seem like, I would assume, it seems like Anthony Mackie is the best guess at who will lead the Avengers to the level that Steve Rogers led the old Avengers as a part of that. But I would just say, to your fade away point, Noticeably not on a chair name either was Brie Larson. And I think there was a time that Captain Marvel might have taken over as the leader of the Avengers, but I think that's kind of fading too. And I suspect she might just kind of fade away. Like, she's on another planet again. And we might just not ever see that version of Captain Marvel again, which would be a shame. I would be sad about, but it seems like the fandom of this universe has not been kind to Brie Larson. And so she might not be inclined to come back.
Right, and her influence is most likely going to manifest purely through Ms. Marvel, right? And that I think the Marvels set it up nicely, actually, that if Brie Larson did not want to be a big figure in the MCU anymore, that she's kind of passed down her mentorship to Kamala Khan, and that she can carry the Captain Marvel stuff forward, right? In terms of, because when we're in rhetorical situations, so I do need to kind of invoke an academic concept. Intertextuality means that we can't see anything in a vacuum, right? And that everything that's all the context and the other texts surrounding one text that we're looking at, you have to acknowledge them and its influence on them. And I think for me, it really is this announcement of the Doomsday Cast that is like, as I was watching this movie, granted, I have a unique position where I was like, I fell asleep at the wheel when this came out, right? And then so now I'm seeing it after post of the Avengers Doomsday announcement. I couldn't help but thinking, okay, what does this mean in terms of like, how does this fit into the bigger puzzle? And I think what could be really fun is that we could end up with like 3 competing Avengers teams, right? We can have one that's Sam Wilson is trying to put together. We can have the Thunderbolts, who are really the asterisk, I'm assuming, is because they're Dark Avengers, right?
I'm going to be exposed as a giant Marvel nerd. The Japanese poster, or maybe it was the Korean poster, put the text. So there's an international poster that's the Thunderbolts asterisk, because that's the official title. And then underneath it said asterisk, the Avengers were not available. So that seems to be what it means. And the newer trailer kind of suggests that, like, why are we calling these? I mean, I'm already in love with the Yelena line that's like, wait, so we all just punch and shoot? Like, we didn't call any of the others? Like, I think it's a great concept for a movie, and I'm hopeful for Thunderbolts. So I think that's what it means is that, and it is kind of a darker Avengers. But I like your theory about multiple Avengers teams competing.
Right, because if Kamala Khan, again, mild spoilers for Daredevil, although maybe it's not a spoiler if I don't specify that, she's reportedly on the West Coast, right? So we could have West Coast Avengers, Thunderbolts, aka Dark Avengers, and classic Avengers 2.0, right? Like, and like I can just picture them doing something similar to the Spider-Men pointing at each other meme, being like, well, who are the real Avengers? Yeah. And then arguing with each other about who are actually the Avengers, and then maybe some version of them consolidates going forward or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that could be fun. Since we're talking about Thunderbolts so much, Greg, I need your take on the A24 trailer as our resident A24 bro.
Wait, what A24
the Thunderbolts?
Trailer?
Wait, what? For Thunderbolts?
No, I haven't seen this. What are you talking about?
Breaking news, folks. Okay, so I cannot believe you haven't seen this. I thought I was like the last one who watched this. Okay, so the newest Thunderbolts trailer is shot in the style of an A24 movie. And the title cards are listing all of the A24 movies the cast has been in.
This has to be a parody. This is a real official trailer?
It's a real trailer. I cannot believe you have not seen this.
Well, I have my homework now. I'm not even wearing my A24 t-shirt. I wore it yesterday.
It's delightful. It's delightful. You didn't even hear them talking about this on The Big Picture? Like, I think they did, or they talked about it somewhere that I was listening
to. I'm probably
anyway.
Behind. I think I at some point saw probably what it ever inspired this, because it was like a list of how like these are actually incredibly accomplished actors and actresses.
That's what the trailers like, but it's also the way it's edited is very evocative of an A24 style movie. Yeah.
All right. I'm excited. And I am pretty excited about that movie because it's a lot of the most charismatic people. I'm not a huge David Harbour fan, but it's kind of hard to deny that Red Guardian is pretty funny and kind of fun.
I like him a lot.
Maybe we'll talk about my lowered expectations or my lower admiration of Stranger Things actors in the near future.
Oh,
But
that's the second oblique reference you've made to what we're recording right after this. Also,
Um,
Giancarlo Esposito giving a pretty standard Giancarlo Esposito performance.
True.
Yeah.
I mean, I will just say I think whatever happens with the MCU, we have to acknowledge it was an incredible achievement, and I'm not convinced that it's going to pull out of its wobble, but I am convinced that they are committed to still making everything count. They're not doing these reboots or anything like that, and I think, weaving in more and more to it is very heavy. The last thing, because you put it in the list, so I know you walked out. The stinger on this movie is Sam Wilson back in the prison talking to Harrison Ford, but then Tim Blake Nelson, the leader, hints that the multiverse is about to crash in on itself, which is the baseline plot for Secret Wars. In the comics, Secret Wars happen because two dimensions crash into each other, and this leads to this weird limbo space. They cannot adapt that arc directly. It would make no sense. But I think it will be used to be something about the multiverses crashing together. So I suspect that would, if your theory on Avengers 5 is right, then Avengers 6 is like, well, now we have this planet with 3 and all these other universes coming in. And that's maybe part of how we get into the X-Men or what have you. So don't forget that Spectrum, one of the Marvels, is in the X-Men dimension. So when they crash together... Beast. With Beast, exactly right. And Beast has a chair. Well, Frasier has a chair. Undetermined who Kelsey Grammer is playing. So yeah. So I mean, I'll just summarize all this in your point about intertextuality. That if you're hanging on to Marvel right now, I think it's because of the intertextuality and speaking across these things and the richness you get from that. If you're out on Marvel, I think it's that you've got totally frustrated by this and you're like, I just want to see a movie and have that movie be the movie. And that's also legitimate.
Right, because I think while it's a MacGuffin, the adamantium in this movie very much is like setting up potentially a scene in one of these next big crossover movies where Wolverine... This is me being wishful thinking, but Hugh Jackman's Wolverine pops in through a time door, talks to whoever they're casting as new Wolverine, and is like, look, you got to stay away from this adamantium stuff, right? Like, this is what happened to me. Like, that's possible just by them referencing that there's adamantium and everyone's making a grab for it. But all right, I think we did a pretty good job with this and sufficiently spun it out into the wider MCU. Greg, thanks. This was so fun. I'm so glad that you and I are on Marvel Island. Where can folks find you when you're not on Marvel Island?
Well, I'm around on the internet somewhat. So you can find me on Letterboxd and Instagram at @IonCanon. I also just recorded a conversation about Revenge of the Sith for Force Ghost Conversations, which I plug because Jen's doing the next one. So if you do not listen to the wonderful Anthony on Force Ghost Conversations, you can get a little more of Jen and I by tuning in over there a couple times lately. And just because he's a friend of the pod, shout out to Colby over at the Colby Cast, because when I was desperately seeking Captain America content, he was my salve and let me hear their take on it when Jen, PT, and Antonio were like, Greg, this is not important enough to interrupt Oscar coverage. For the record, they were correct. I'm not saying they were wrong, but it was disappointing. And so I was really glad to get to hear some good friends of the pod geek out about this movie.
Yeah, and their coverage of Daredevil Born Again has been awesome for me too. So
wait, all right. Did you know there were 2 last week? We talked about the first one.
Yes.
Did you I never caught that until like Sunday. I was like, oh no. Yeah, I just found out that I haven't watched the latest.
You didn't go back to the menu? Because
no,
they're both there.
I mean, I think I quickly closed out. I watched it and it was like 10:30 at night. I'm like, I'm going to bed and shut it right out. So I need to go. Maybe I'll do that tonight. I'll go watch a Daredevil episode. Daredevil has been fantastic. So if you're out on the MCU, Daredevil might bring you back. So.
Wait a minute. Charlie Cox was not mentioned. He didn't get a chair.
Nope.
Oh.
Neither did did any of the Young Avengers, right? There are a lot of Young Avengers you would think would be in the mix, right?
Yeah.
Catherine Newton as Ant-Man's daughter. I forget her superhero name.
Cassidy?
Cassie, but I forget, I think that superhero has a name.
Oh.
We didn't get Hawkeye, either Hawkeye, but young Hawkeye and Kate Bishop at this moment, or
Cassie
again,
Lang.
Cassie Lang. She doesn't
Who
have a superhero
is
name?
apparently she has 3 names. Has also been known as Stature, Stinger, and Ant Girl.
I think I was thinking of Stature.
Okay.
And we didn't get either of Wanda's boys, one of whom was now in Agatha, kind of more established a little bit. So there are a lot of Young Avengers kicking around if they want to do a Young Avengers TV show separately to those 3 teams you listed. Although, yes, Ms. Marvel may be starting the West Coast Avengers or the Champions, and they could pull in Miles Morales. There was also, the young Patriot, the young Captain America was in Falcon and Winter Soldier. Yep. And so, yeah, boy, Marvel's crazy. I want to go to bed just thinking about it. So, hey, and because PT is not here, let's just say at LTR Pod on Letterboxd, and you can follow what each of us is watching there using the hashtag LTR Pod. Jen, where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at Sopchockchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI, and on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jinn. On your left, Greg. Thanks for listening. You can follow The Long Take Review on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free, and you'll be the first to know when a new episode drops. You'll also receive written reviews of new films with Oscar buzz, as well as any new installments of prop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.